Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. Good to see you, Clyde. Thank you as always. And for those who are listening live, as we're doing this right now, um, you can actually find a way to text as we're working if you open up a second window so that you have the window with the class, and then you have the window with the text window, and that way you can text as we go along. Because, see, unless you do that, if you're just at the class window, there's no text window there, although Desti did tell me she was going to fix that. Okay? Um, I guess this is an unusual title for this session. And I said four things that could revolutionize America. So I'm going to get right into it. And actually, it's okay if you notice that it's more than four things, but I'm going to mention more than four things because I believe that a combination of at least four of these things could revolutionize America. I believe we're in a pivotal time in this country, actually in the world. And there's some things that I just believe we should be questioning and actually outright changing because uh, of the fact that it's a new world. For an example, one of the things that I believe could uh, begin to make some serious change in America is taxes. For an example, nobody who makes $100,000 or less should have to pay income tax. Period. Period. None. And in fact, if they're making less than $100,000, they shouldn't even take it. The government shouldn't even take that money. But that's because that way you would get your money, all of your money, all the time, right? You wouldn't have to file for it at the end of the year and take a truncated check every month because they took your money. Uh, so if you make under $100,000, and it can always be changed, it can be upped if necessary. But think about it: $100,000 or less, you don't pay any taxes. And ending tax write-offs. Ending tax write-offs. Now, some people say, well, that's not fair. I say, yes, it is. Because tax write-offs allows the wealthy and the rich to get around taxes. As your current president has boasted about and bragged about and joked about and laughed at us about. Uh, yeah, it's not something that's funny. The idea of tax write-offs. That's also a way that the wealthy and the rich get to decide policies, sometimes for generations, because they can do what's called philanthropy, which is really just a way of saying that rich people get to determine how whole communities and whole cities have to do certain things. And they pay for it with money that then gets subtracted from their tax debt. That's a very unfair system. As you look into it seriously, you'll see that tax write-offs, no, we should end that. Of course, you have to drag it from them kicking and screaming, but trust me, it would make some serious change, right? Okay. Another area is this: voting. Think about this. What if everybody is automatically registered to vote at age 18 and they can never lose their right to vote? Ask yourself this question: why is it that when you get convicted of crimes that you can have your vote taken away? They call it taking away your citizenship. Why do you lose your citizenship because you've been convicted of a crime? Okay? If we look at that closely, we would see that there's something else going on here. See, your right to vote should not be something that can be taken away. That belongs to you being a citizen. And so the idea of taking away one's citizenship because you've been convicted of a crime, that's something that I believe should be changed. Okay? Um, and we'll get into it. As you talk about it, think about it, examine it, and then ask yourself, why is that? Why is that? Why do you lose your right to vote? And as you look around at what's going on in this country right now, the way that the Republicans and the right wing are going after our ability to vote, black folks in particular, man, the disenfranchisement is huge. It should tell us something about how important they hold our right to vote. So, if you never lost your right to vote and everybody was automatically registered at age 18, that could surely make some change in this country. Okay? Now, this one is kind of deep here, this next one. And it actually covers several things. I want you to think about this question. Why is there such a thing as a statute of limitations? Statutes of limitations. First of all, let's define what that is. Statutes of limitations are laws that are passed by legislative bodies in common law systems to set the maximum time after an event within which legal proceedings can be initiated. In other words, something happens and there's a certain set time that charges or suits or something has to be filed in order for it to go to court. Okay? Statutes of limitations, which go back to early Roman law, and they're a fundamental part of European and US law. Okay? These statutes, which apply both to civil and criminal actions, supposedly are designed to prevent fraudulent and stale claims from arising after all evidence has been lost or after the facts have become obscured through the passage of time or the defective memory, death, or disappearance of witnesses. But now here's the thing. Many times, the statute of limitations is used as a way to protect white people from crimes against black people. Um, think about it. There was no statute of limitations, for an example. What about all the rapes and abuses that have been heaped on black women all during slavery and coming after slavery, all up until now? They're still abused. If you notice, the so-called Me Too movement focuses on white women, and even though a black woman started it, it's like, oh, we don't deal with the abuse against black women. That's not something we're concerned with. Which black women should be first and foremost in the front of that movement in terms of getting getting some kind of reparations, repair. Okay, and black men too. A whole lot of black men was abused sexually during slavery. So the idea that we who have been the most abused are the least compensated because of the statute of limitations. Now, what would happen if the statute of limitations was repealed and taken off the books, so there was no longer a time frame that limited your ability to bring suit in either civil or criminal situations? Whoa. Because, that's one of the things that the former slave owners' families and the people who participated in the slave trade, they love to say, oh, well, the statute of limitations passed on all that stuff. What if it wasn't? And we could sue if we could show, and there's been cases that have shown some of the biggest corporations in America, uh, they've looked into their past and found the evidence that they participated in slavery in one form or another, or the slave trade. Wow. Yeah, that would create some serious stuff. Okay. Um, in that same vein, um, one of the things that I think we should be looking at is in terms of education. And I'm going to go further into that, but in terms of education, one of the things I think that we should look at is black people in particular. We need to have a lot more lawyers, a lot more lawyers, uh, because we need to be able to dig into the law for ourselves and deal with that. That's one of the problems we have is we are not able really to to deal with law that well because 99% of the time, who do we have to deal with when we go to courts? White people, white men especially. They're the lawyers, they're the judges, the vast majority, right? So let's look at a couple of things. One, what if there was free education through college? Um, and in particular, a focus on doctors and lawyers or legal and medical for free and focus in the black communities, that we focus to make sure our children, our young people, were able to go to school if they want to go learn law or to deal with the legal entities, period, and or the medical fields, that they're able to go all the way through college for free. In particular, when it comes to legal, law enforcement is something we should definitely look at because that's something that we need to have community control of. And we can have that if we had lawyers and legal people to assist us in getting that kind of community control. Now, some people say, oh, we couldn't have free college, couldn't have no tuition. Oh, yes, we could. The reason why is this. Number one, there are schools, there are colleges and universities in the United States right now where tuition is free. Okay? And there may be stipulations, or you might have to do some work at the school, or you might have to do some after the school. But the point is that it could be free. The only reason there's cost is to keep out most people. And what I mean is this: colleges and universities have what's called endowments. And some of the biggest colleges and universities have huge, huge endowments. They could afford to pay for people for the next 100 years. You think I'm joking? Let's look at a few of them. Howard University, Harvard University, their endowment fund assets $37 billion. Yeah, you see it there, Harvard University, $37 billion. And of course, for those who never heard me talk about how much is a billion, And I've been doing this a lot lately since they had they have a big lottery here going on in the United States right now, where the Mega Millions lottery, it's a multi-state lottery, it passed $1 billion because it keeps rolling, right? So last week they had the first $1 billion lottery, Mega Millions. Nobody won, so now it's going over $1.5 billion. And then there's a smaller one that also rolled over, so it's now up to $600 million. So we have two lotteries in play right now that are combined $2 billion prizes. That's some very dangerous stuff. But here's what people, in fact, is you can tell because when they talk, the media goes out and talks to people in the lines getting their lottery tickets, right? They're asking, what would you do with the money? 99% of the time, they say things like, oh, I'll get a couple of cars, I'll buy a house, I'll pay for my children's education, I'll take a trip around the world. See, most people cannot wrap their minds around how much is $1 billion. $1 billion is 1,000 millions. 1,000 millions. What could you do with 1,000 millions of dollars? See, you could give your family, you could create a trust, for an example, or a foundation, or whatever you want to call it, and put $100 million in that trust or whatever, right? And you would still have 900 millions of dollars left. See, your family could not spend all that money. Okay? You give them $100 million, they'll kill themselves before they get through spending it all. That's one way to get rid of them, right? But think about it. So if you had $1 billion, what could you do with it? See, it becomes bigger than you. It becomes bigger than you. It ain't about buying a house or even a couple of houses, 25 cars, all the clothes you can think of, traveling around the world. You would still be under $100 million. You follow me? So now Harvard University has $37 billion in endowment. What's an endowment? An endowment is to fund the assets of the school, and it's liquid. Okay? Yale University, $27 billion. Stanford University, $24 billion. Princeton, $23 billion. MIT, $14 billion. University of Pennsylvania, $12 billion. Texas A&M, $10 billion. University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, $10 billion. Do y'all understand? They could pay the tuition for years and years for people, for us. Okay? So don't buy into that thing that, oh, you can't afford it. No, they can afford it very well. Okay, we would need, of course, to work on our young people's idea and some of the older ones about what the education should mean. It should not be just going to get a degree. It would mean going to get the knowledge to change the world. And there are also endowments that are not attached to colleges. For an example, there's something called the President and Fellows of Harvard College. Now, this is a permanent endowment made up of some 12,000 funds set up to support professorships, financial aid, fellowships, and student activities. Listen carefully. It's run by Harvard University's governing body, the 12-member President and Fellows of Harvard College. The gross assets of the President and Fellows of Harvard College is $56.37 billion. That's separate from the college's endowment. That's separate. They can spend it on whatever they want. They can do it for financial aid, whatever. And what we need to understand is, how did these colleges and universities get so rich? They got it off the backs of black people. You don't believe me? That's okay. I don't care. Do the study yourself. You'll find out. This country was built on the backs of black people. Here's another foundation, a source of money that we don't think about. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's a, quote, philanthropic foundation founded by Bill Gates and his wife Melinda, the Microsoft billionaires. And it offers funding and grants to causes including education, homelessness, disease, poverty, and hunger, both nationally and abroad. Understand what that means. They get to write off the money that they spend doing what they feel like. Now, I'm gonna give you an idea of how deep this is. And it's considered a nonprofit. And Warren Buffett, who pledged most of his wealth to the organization, he gave it about $31 billion worth in June 2006. The gross assets of this foundation is $41 billion. Understand this. $41 billion could go a long way to end homelessness in the United States. It could go a long way dealing with hunger. You follow me? They're not trying to end it. They just want to tease it. And they get to write off taxes. That's how come they can be so filthy rich. Now, there's got to be some game going on when they talk about, well, we just want to give away the money. I'm going to give away my wealth because I'm not going to leave it to my children. Trust me, they are doing things that will affect the entire planet for generations. For generations. Uh, let's move on to the other side of this, education, because what goes along with that is medical. See, there should be free health care. And you have to understand that until Nixon, corporations weren't allowed to make a profit on when it came to medical care, with medical insurance. That started with Nixon and his cronies. They said, look, we can hook this up, we can make billions and billions of dollars, and they have. They changed the medical care system. Okay? What if there was free medical care? And some countries have it. Some countries have it. They got free education, free medical care. Cuba, for an example, is free medical care, and they have some of the best medical care in the world. Country like the United States has all this wealth and so many people dying. Let me give you an example of what kind of stuff can happen. There's something called the Kaiser Foundation Hospitals. It's a nonprofit entity under the umbrella of the healthcare giant called Kaiser Permanente. That's an medical insurance company, right? And they also have a non-profit side that has a network of hospitals, physicians, and healthcare plans. Kaiser Foundation hospitals partner with several healthcare providers around the country and has some 10 million members in its network. The gross assets of the value of the network's 38 hospitals, 600 plus medical office buildings, and the land they sit on is almost $21 billion. See, it's about money and power. It's not about healing people. It's about owning shit. Look, we could have free health care and we wouldn't have to be so sick. That's something that I can't even begin to talk about because we have to understand how much we are, how much we don't understand, how much we don't understand about wealth. See, wealthy people love to pretend like they're poor. Rich people like to pretend like they're broke, and nothing could be further from the truth. It would change this country if we changed how medical care was dealt with, and it could be free. All right, now I'm going to move to an area that some people say, "Oh, now he's really crazy now." But let's talk about government. Let's talk about government for a minute. Um, the cost of government in the United States. Let me just break it down this way. The cost of the U.S. government to operate per year is $3.5 billion. 3.5 billion. No, no, I'm sorry. $3.5 trillion. $3.5 trillion. I'm sorry. Uh, $3.5 trillion. What does that mean? Well, $3.5 trillion. Remember, we talked about how much is a billion, right? Well, $1 trillion is 1,000 billions. 100,000 millions. Try to wrap your head around that. But it costs the government to operate. The U.S. government costs about $3.5 trillion a year. And that includes everything from the military, which gets a big old piece of that, and education and all those different things. But let's understand something. The cost to operate Congress and the legislative branch costs about $6 billion or more. Okay? One of the traps we have in this country is that we are locked into what's called a two-party system. We have a sip of water here. Ah, let's look at that for a second because, see, most of us think that there's some kind of magical reason why there has to be only two parties. But look at what happens when you have only two parties. It perpetuates itself. Winner take all rules, right? Only one winner, the loser gets nothing. Strategic voting and the wasted vote theory. Okay, we saw that happen in the last presidential election. They didn't like Clinton and they didn't like Trump, and so they voted for somebody else, even though they knew they couldn't win. So that was a wasted vote. But they said, it's my vote, I can waste it if I want to. And now they're saying, how come we can't get rid of this guy? Voters choose not to support parties that they do not view as viable. Okay? Uh, and that's why the third parties can't really get any real traction. Lack of voter support discourages the formation of minor parties. Fewer parties flourish, and the existing parties make rules to perpetuate their power. I'll show you how that works. In the presidential elections last time, you had a whole bunch of people running for president on the Republican side, a whole bunch of them. And you had this interloper jump in it, this guy named Trump, and he soon came to dominate the debates. And they slowly kept knocking off people who were no longer able to participate. How did that happen? I bet you don't know. I bet you if you ask most people, they don't know. They just think it's some kind of system that exists that does that magically. No, it's the way the system is set up. Okay? Now, what if there was no requirement that there be just two parties? Let's look at something real quick. This is uh, how president of the United States gets elected. Look at this. Just look at this for a minute. They start out, of course, you got the requirements, and then you got these conventions and primaries and caucuses, right? And you go through all of that stuff. Then through all of that stuff, then you get down to the general election, and then that's still not the end of it. You still got the electoral college, which we learned the hard way that we don't have no idea how that really works. But it allows somebody who loses the popular vote to win the election. I got a way to deal with that in a minute, but I just want you to think about that for a second. That's a very convoluted process to elect the president. And it also makes it crazy to get them out. I want you to look at these numbers for a second. This is the last election, presidential election in 2016. You see this? Now, Clinton got the most popular votes. But look at the numbers. 28.5% of the adult population, meaning people who live here who are citizens, 28.5% are ineligible to vote. Think about that. Remember what I said earlier. What if everybody became automatically registered to vote when they turned 18? What if you don't lose your right to vote because you've been convicted of a crime? Look at all them people that did not get to vote because they were, quote, ineligible. Then look at the almost 30% of the people who just didn't vote. Wow. If just some of them had voted, it could have changed the whole election. And so when you have a country where that many people just choose not to vote, and you got that many people who are ineligible for whatever reasons not to vote, that's much more than the entire population who voted. So Trump got into the White House with less than 1 in 5 votes, or 1 in 5 possible votes. Less than 20% of the voting population are eligible, or people who are eligible to vote, or the adults. Okay? So he has no majority. He acts like it. And that base that they're always talking about, that's 1 in 5 people. Okay? But now, what if we had a different way of having people get into office? I'm gonna lay this out this way, and then I'm gonna show you something in a minute. Um, what if we got rid of certain things like the U.S. Congress as it's formed now? Let's do it like this. What if in each state, they have a state legislature, okay? What if in each state the state legislature was made up of the mayors of the cities in that state? Okay? So instead of having these people go to the state legislature and spend all year messing around, what if it was the mayors from each city? They go to the state legislature and they operate on the basis of making the laws and dealing with the money for that state. All right, that would be something radically different, right? What if The Congress, the US Congress, which costs billions of dollars, what if we got rid of them and said, all right, here's what we're going to do? The governors from each state, they now go to Washington and they are now the Congress. See, why do we need all them people? They ain't doing nothing, fighting and stuff and costing us billions of dollars, right? But just think about it for a minute. What if that was the way in which the Congress was set up? That the governors from each state ran it. And here's the next thing. What if we didn't have the way we do things now with so called elections? And we had something called sortition. It's the word I want to put out there. It's called sortition. Sortition is the use of random selection to populate a legislative assembly like parliament or Congress, or to elect or to have an office filled. For an example, what if you have all those mayors from the different cities in a particular state, they go and they meet, and out of that group, you have a random selection of one of them, and that person becomes the governor. Now I'm going to show you how this could work in a way that we don't even think about. Number one, that person who's the governor, and you could have a vice governor to a second, same way, randomly selected out of that group of mayors. Okay, it makes them much more accountable. It also means that you could, if somebody ain't acting right, you could remove them and select somebody else. Makes them accountable. Now, what it also does is this: it ends this craziness that we have gotten to this point where money determines who gets to be in these offices. I live in Illinois. There's a governor race going on right now. Two filthy rich billionaires are running for governor. One of them has already put $150 million of his own money into the race. The other one he hasn't told yet, but he's a billionaire too. Okay? There's no chance in hell for anybody who's not rich, and I mean very rich, to run for governor. And they don't have the interests of people in heart. They don't care. And I asked the same question for years. Why do people spend millions and millions of dollars to get a position that only pays a couple $100,000 a year? You see, it ain't because they just nice. There's a lot more at stake. So, sortition would be a way that you could get all of that money and stuff out of the elections. Okay? Because we can go back all the way to the bottom, since I said the mayors of the cities would be the legislators of the state. Well, what about if in the cities themselves you change the way in which the mayors are elected? Okay? You could do it. You could do it by sortition. You could have all the adults uh, who want to be the mayor, put them all in a hat, their names in a hat, and make sure, of course, that they are um, vetted, meaning that they're checked out to make sure that even if they have a criminal record, that is made public. Okay, and maybe you decide, okay, if you got a criminal record, you can't be in the pot. But again, the idea is that you put the eligible people's names in a hat and pull it out by lot, randomly selected. Okay, and that person becomes the mayor. And if the people decide that that mayor's not acting right, and maybe you put a time frame, say, okay, you're elected for 5 years and then you can't run again. Okay? Look at the difference. What I'm trying to get across is that there are different ways to do this whole process. We've been locked into certain ideas, and elections is one of the worst. Elections are one of the worst because it does end up with what we got now all across this country. It takes $1 billion to run for president. Okay? So you take all of that out of it. You can do it for the mayors. You can do it for the state legislators. You can do it for Congress. Because now what we got, since the governors are the Congress, now how do we get the president? We get the president the same way. Take all the governors, put their names in the hat, and then randomly select one to be the president, randomly select another to be the vice president. They're presidents for whatever we want to decide. We might decide it can be 4 years, it might be 5 years, whatever, but they can't run again. And if the the governors decide, well, we're not happy with this, they can have a recall. Now some people say, oh, that would be chaotic. Well, what you got now? And what people need to understand is that democracies, we don't really have a democracy. What we have is a republic. A republic is when the people elect representatives to go and make laws and represent them. A democracy, a genuine democracy, is when you have the people directly voting for laws. Okay? You don't need a representative. You vote directly on the laws. That would make things a lot different. And most people don't understand this. In fact, if you ask people, uh, you say, well, is this a democracy? They say, yeah, because that's what they're told, right? But in the Pledge of Allegiance, it says what? It says right there, I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. Yeah. So we've been operating under an illusion in the first place. But sortition, and again, it could be it might need to be very refined, and there's a lot of work to be done to understand and see how it will work in different situations. But it's the idea that you can change how the politics in the country, how the governing agencies operate, how you get there. It can make it totally different. And I'll give you an example of why this might be so necessary. We have in this country this idea that the majority rules, and we say, well, that's fair. We have a democratic society, and the most people who vote for something, that's what wins. So the majority rules. And if you the folks that set it up, you set it up so that you and your people are the majority forever. And what that does, it makes the minority have to adjust and live with whatever the majority decides. And it's never going to be fair. It's never going to be fair because the minority doesn't get to decide. And then what you do is you turn around after so many years and you label certain groups of people as minorities. What does that say? It says you can't win because you're not the majority. You can't expect to win because you're not the majority. You're the minority. So you have to bow down to us. You have to submit to us, the majority, in order to get anything. We will award you stuff, but you can't get it legitimately because you're not the quote majority. That's why in the United States of America there's such a battle to define the majority, to decide who is the majority. And it's automatically assumed that whoever's the majority, they get to win all the time. Robert's Rules of Order, what do they call it? Robert's Rules of Order says that you have people vote and the majority rules. Who is Robert? And how did he get to be the one who decided that? How did he get to be the one that decided that the ones who lose don't get nothing? Sortition would end all of that. Okay? You can have constitutional convention, you can have policy juries, you have people's panels. You have a lot of different ways to decide things that does not lock people up into uh, a situation where only the majority wins. Let me put this up here again. Ask yourself, ask your children, ask your friends, why do we only have a two-party system? You know, there's been attempts over the years with black people, with others, to try to have a third party. And it never works. Why? Because the country is locked into this idea that the only legitimate parties are the two majority parties, the Democrats and Republicans. And now it's full-blown warfare between those two parties because you got a warmonger in office. You see? And black people, being, quote, a minority, as they call us, we're not wanted in one party and we're tolerated in the other party, but we don't get to run either one. It's a losing proposition all the way around. It's a losing proposition. Black people can't win. And it was set up that way. So let's change it so that everybody, every group has the same opportunity to win. If you start on the local level, like in Chicago, we have what's called a city council. The city is broken down into 50 different wards, and there's an alderman for each ward. It's done the same way, by voting, right? Which means if you ain't got no money and you ain't got no backing, you can't even run. Well, what if it was random selection, where the adults in a ward could, if you wanted to be a part of it, you could be, okay? And you have a random selection. That would change them politics real quick. And out of that city council, that's where maybe where you get your mayor. Okay, randomly selected out of the 50 aldermen. You see the difference in how the whole process could work and changes things. It changes things. And one of the ways in which you could truly change the society, change America, is by changing how people get into office. Wow. So I want you to think about those things. And you can always come back and watch this again and walk through them. And pick any of them and look at any of the things that I mentioned today. The idea of reparations, which my friend Clyde has been diligent about, and I've known other people in Cobra and other organizations over the years, they have fought for reparations. You see, when the people can control the politics, there would be no need to beg somebody for reparations or to implore someone to give us reparations. We could dictate those reparations ourselves if we controlled the politics. And when you control the politics, you also can then dig into the money. You see, in this country, what they did, they were very slick. They said, okay, we got public and we got private. The private is what the wealthy own and control, and the public is what the wealthy own and control, but we allow the poor and the middle class to get some of it or use some of it. So you have private and public colleges. You don't get the same kind of education in a public college that you get in a private college. You have public and private medical facilities, medical care. You don't get the same kind of care in a public hospital that you do in a private hospital. You have public and private education. You don't get the same kind of education in a private education and a public education. Public and private housing, you know, and ain't no comparison between private housing and public housing. You see, those walls need to be knocked down. There needs to be better understanding of how this comes to be. How does this operate? Who decides public and private? I bet you this much. If the public, the true public, got to decide about public housing, I bet that would be a lot different. You wouldn't have the kind of public housing, the kind of housing that passes for public housing in this country. You wouldn't have the kind of things that happen in public housing. And you wouldn't have so many homeless people. Think about it. Why do we have so many homeless people? Especially people who have good hearts, good people who are homeless. You got homeless women who are veterans and they got children and they're homeless. You got people who work every day who are homeless. That should not be. And if we change the way the politics, thank you, Clyde. Clyde said politics is control. That's right. You know, I hear this every day about how, oh, well, so and so is politicizing the country. No, the country's already political. Everything is political. Everything. You know. And, lastly but not least, again, I just want to mention that it's important that we understand that reparations is due. We can decide how reparations can what they need to be and how they need to be implemented if we control the politics. And so, in this process of revolutionizing America, some of these things they can be done. But we need to understand that we have to teach people. There's a reason that I'll bet money. Most of the people who see this session, they've never heard of the word sortition. Most of the people who see it have no idea that there are other ways to elect people. They think the only way is two-party system and so-called democracy in America. Man, it's so deep. They think the only way you can have education is the way it's done. The only way they have taxes. All of this stuff. So let us share this knowledge and pass it on, do more research and learn about it so we can share it with others and we can create a society where people can change the world. Thank you. And as always, I want to say no justice, no peace, no love, KNOW. Had to text that in there. Thank you, Clyde. And I will see you in the whirlwind.